And Pete is here to share his wisdom and also deepen our understanding, creating a conversation around our conditioned tendencies and how to blend with them. And we also will have some time for some questions and answers, and maybe give some information if you want about our upcoming Embodied Leadership courses here in Barcelona. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Pete.
Excellent. Thanks, Clark. So, we've got some more people arriving.
Yeah.
Good evening. Welcome. So what I'm going to do is, so this webinar is designed for people who've already done the level 1 program and are interested in exploring the level 2 program. And it may well be that we have some people joining who haven't done the level 1 program. So what we're going to do is kind of blend with that a little bit and try to, try to make it work. But at some level, some of what I'm going to cover will assume a starting level of knowledge. We'll assume a starting level of understanding. And then what I'm not going to do is introduce the whole subject of somatics here and that whole body of work. What I want to do is to deepen actually the understanding of a particular aspect of that, which is the conditioned tendency response. And so that's what I'm going to explore in a bit more detail as part of our conversation. So just by way of starting, before we get going, what I'm going to invite everybody to do is to center together. So you can do that sitting or standing, whichever you prefer, based on the environment in which you happen to be in at the moment. And I'm going to invite you all to turn your cameras on so that we can all see each other. It's always nice to have a sort of sense of visual connection with whoever else is on the call. So just as you arrive this evening, just allow your attention to drop down inside of the physical body and to feel into what it's like to be you at this moment in time. Whatever aches and pains, whatever stresses, whatever tensions, whatever there is that you're experiencing at this moment, just allow yourself to experience that. Allow yourself to feel that and allow that to be. And allow that to inform you about what it is that's going on for you at the moment. And as we do this, I invite you to keep your eyes open so that we stay connected in community with each other while we center. Okay. So we start off and we center ourselves across 3 domains, the 3 dimensions that we live in. First domain is length. So allowing yourself to center in length, extending up and relaxing down. Putting a little bit of air between your vertebrae so that you extend your spine up and you allow yourself to be fully in your length. Allowing yourself to live fully in your own dignity. But at the same time, relaxing down. We're not trying to hold ourselves up or force ourselves up. We're allowing gravity to hold us on the planet. So we're extending up and we're relaxing down. Allowing ourselves to be connected to both the ground and to the heavens, heaven and earth. An expanded perspective, plus also a groundedness in action. And then let's center in width, finding our balance left to right. Either finding your balance on the chair or finding your balance in terms of how you're standing. Allowing yourself to find that place of being balanced with your weight. And allow yourself to fill up from the inside so that you meet your own boundaries on either side. Almost allowing your breath to fill you up on either side so that you meet your own boundaries at your ribcage and your skin. And allow yourself to take up the space that you're due in the world. Filling out, being visible. Holding your boundaries. And then finding our balance front to back, balance and depth. Again, we tend to orient towards the future ahead of us, the past behind us. So find that place in the middle where your weight is balanced, where you're neither worrying about the past or preoccupied about the future, but allowing yourself to arrive into the present moment. And then take a deep breath down into your stomach. And a nice long exhale. And bring your attention to your body's center of gravity. Allowing yourself to feel from that place and experience yourself from that place. And as you do that, repeat or speak your commitment or your declaration to yourself. Whatever it is that you care about, that you're working on, that you're committed to in this world, whatever that is for you at this moment, just speak it in whatever form it is. And allow yourself to feel the resonance of that through your body as you speak it. Okay. And if you're standing up, feel free to take a seat. We're just going to go around and do a mood check. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak my mood, and then I'm going to name somebody, and then you'll go next and speak your mood in a couple of words, and then you choose the next person, and so we continue around. So if I start with myself, my mood at the moment is anticipatory and excited. Okay, Pedro. Pedro, are you there? No, I'm not hearing you, Pedro, so we'll go on to Verena. You're on mute, Verena.
Yes. Right now, I'm feeling grateful to be here, but most of today, my mood has been quite frazzled.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to choose who's next?
Maria.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Maria.
My mood is grateful and arriving.
Thank you. Do you want to choose who's next?
And Gina.
Thank you. My mood is calm and balanced with love. Thank you. And I choose Gabby.
Hi, I'm expectant and a little bit frazzled because I've just rushed to get here. And hi, everybody, and thank you.
Thanks, Gabby. And can you choose somebody next? Pass it on.
I can't see any names, but
Okay, well, we've got Gemma, Pedro, or we've got Clark.
Okay, Gemma.
Gemma, can you hear us?
Well, I can see Clark, so I'll say Clark.
Okay. Clark, you're on mute.
I have to unmute myself. So my mood is calm. I feel calm in my body, and a heightened awareness of sensations within and without me.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll move over and see if either Pedro or Gemma are there. Hear me? They're unmuted, so I'm assuming.
Oh, Gemma has gone. Pedro, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, but can you hear me? Oh, I can barely hear you.
Can barely hear you. I'll turn my volume up so I can hear you.
All right, you hear me? No, it's hard to hear you, Pedro. You cannot hear me. Okay.
Okay, I think you have a technology issue there, so I'm going to leave you with that for a moment and just continue on.
And I'll read it out. Oh, don't worry.
Hopefully, you'll be able to sort it out while we continue on. Okay, so this evening, let's talk about the conditioned tendency. So we spoke about this on the level 1 program, and we do a little bit of work to distinguish our conditioned tendency. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just describing the conditioned tendency, just to remind everybody of a starting point around that. And then what I'd like to do is to start to deepen our conversation about that and deepen our understanding of the conditioned tendency. So the conditioned tendency is that place that we go to whenever we are triggered by something. You know, we have our patterns and our places that we go to, and something happens and we experience that challenge, that tension, that the grab is the way we talk about it in the programs. And we go to a place, a response that we have. And we often find ourselves going to a very familiar place. Sometimes that will be a place that will involve some degree of resistance or fighting or trying to get some kind of control over the situation. Sometimes it will be a place where we find ourselves wanting to run or to exit the situation or remove ourselves from the situation. Sometimes we'll find ourselves doing some kind of dissociation. Or maybe we'll find ourselves pleasing and appeasing and trying to make friends and make nice with other people. Or sometimes we'll find ourselves freezing. But what's true is that we have, each of us, a place that is the predominant place that we will go to. We all have the capacity for all of those responses. You know, there are certain situations you put anybody in and you will get them to fight. Yeah, there are certain situations in which we will all fight for our lives or for our family or whatever. But then there's just the day-to-day thing, and there will be a place that we habitually go. And part of our work in this program is to start to see how that happens, how that shows up in us. And so we spent some time on the level 1 program exploring what was our pattern. You know, and the patterns tend to show up as like a move against in some way, a move towards, which is more of a please and appease kind of response, or a move away, or some kind of freeze response. So we get to know our patterns, and then we start to see how those patterns live inside of us and how they live in our somas. So how they live at the physical level. You know, that fight response that has us tense up and bunch our fists or start to move ourselves aggressively towards another person. Or maybe it's that flight response, that move away response that has us start to distance ourselves, or we just move away mentally and emotionally and exit the situation through some kind of dissociation. Or maybe there's the please and appease response, where we find ourselves turning towards somebody, trying to seek safety in the place of relationship in those moments. And so we spend some time seeing how they show up physically, seeing how they show up emotionally, kind of emotions that are triggered along with that, and the memories that come along with that. And we start to observe our conditioned tendency at those 3 levels. And we do that on the program to then start to practice, how do we center ourselves in the face of the grab? How do we then center ourselves as a way to interrupt our conditioned response, to interrupt that pattern of removing ourselves from the situation unquestioningly or fighting the situation unquestioningly, so that we can start to experience choice in those moments. Because one of the things that happens when we're in our conditioned tendency response is we're fairly immune to reasoning and rationalization. There's no point in telling somebody in their conditioned tendency that there's nothing to be afraid of, or that there's no need to get upset or angry or worked up. There's no point in doing that. We are beyond that world of rationalizations and understanding, and we're in a world where our biological history is taken over and is driving us towards safety. Is driving us to produce safety through one of the mechanisms that we've historically learned. And so when we center ourselves, what we're doing is we're centering ourselves in order to provide a break of an habitual pattern of behavior. And so that we offer ourselves a moment to choose a different kind of response. And that's a really important thing to be able to do. To be able to gently, kindly take care of ourselves in that moment in order that we have a different possibility for action. And what I want to do in this conversation is also talk about the idea that there are kind of two ways in which we can do that. There are two ways in which we can center ourselves in that moment. There's one way in which we can center ourselves in that moment, and this is, this is important, which is to, almost like a stress response, is to give us some space and some time to have a different response and to be able to choose something different. And that's, at some level, that's a hugely important thing to be able to do. We're in a stressful situation, somebody comes at us for whatever reason, whatever's going on for them, we need to be able to go, okay, how can I manage myself in this situation? How can I control whatever my conditioned responses are so that I can be productive in this situation? And then there's another level of response. Well, no, let me talk about that first one. We can do that first level of response without really addressing the history that created that response. We can do that as like a stress relief, as a kind of like a break in our reactions, as a, kind of like a handbrake on our emotions in that moment, and to kind of go and give us space and go, okay, now I can do something else. And underneath that can sit, at some level, a fairly fractured foundation. A foundation that that kind of has some innate challenges inside of it, that has got some stuff that's unresolved. And so there's another level that's available inside of our centering response in that moment, which is a centering where we turn and we face the internalized fear that created the conditioned tendency response. It's not always a fear, but it often is. Fear is a very powerful emotion, and one we don't tend to talk about a lot, so it's a powerful one to use. And when we turn and we face, part of what we're doing in that moment is we're giving dignity and we're giving space to that underlying response. We're not trying to in any way center as a way to numb, or center as a way to not experience it. We're centering as a way to give us the wherewithal to feel and to experience whatever it is of that history that is running through us in that moment, and then to be able to respond from that place. And that's almost like another level of centering in terms of conditioned tendency. And when we do that, it is part of the blending process that we talk about in this work. Because when we center in that way and we allow ourselves to turn and face and experience and give validity to whatever internalized history that is running through us, we're not pushing it away anymore. We're not judging our response for being childish, or I should be over that by now, or I'm whatever age I am, I should be able to do something else. Yeah, we probably all had moments of having those thoughts. We're in that moment, we're allowing it to be there and to be real and to be something that probably at some place took care of us in a particular way. That took care of a particular need that we had in a moment in our history. But every time we kind of hold ourselves at a distance from it, we hold ourselves away from it, at some level, we say we're fighting it a little bit. We're saying something about actually we're disidentifying with that part of ourselves. And what I know about this work is that very often at the start of this work, part of our journey is that the conditioned tendency response is so overwhelming, or is so, not overwhelming, it's like it has so much power and control that all we're doing is really getting to know it, understanding how we experience it, and we're getting this opportunity, this centering practice as a way to put the brakes on, and we're getting the opportunity to find a different way to respond in the moment. And that's brilliant because it gives people an expanded range of choice in the world. And then the other aspect of this work is that we're not just about kind of helping people in stressful moments. The other aspect of this work is that we're in a conversation of self-cultivation. And so part of our work is not just how do I respond to stressful moments, but how do I actually start to deal with the foundations? And how do I cultivate a self that is able to respond differently? And that deeper level of self-cultivation will come when we're able to turn and face into our fears, face into whatever piece of history. So in this work, I remember hearing Richard Strozzi Heckler talking once about the idea that in I think it's the Odyssey in literature, he was looking at the time about how masculinity and warriorship was held across cultures, because fear is something that's not allowed often inside of Western culture and for men. And one of the things that he noticed was that in the Odyssey, when they were writing about, I think it was Odysseus going into battle, that he was told by the god of war that he had to bring fear with him, which is a really interesting concept for a culture of manhood and warriorship, which often dissociates from fear. Anger is kind of allowed, aggression is even allowed, but fear is much less allowed. And I think that has an essence of a very similar theme, which is that, we have to own that bit of our history. We have to allow and to be with rather than pushing away. And so when we think then about the conditioned tendency response and we feel our experience of dissociation or our experience of running away or our experience of fighting, whatever it is, and we center ourselves, that turning and facing then looks like, actually, how do I actually start to face that internalized fear rather than distancing myself from it? And then how do I do something very difficult often in relationship, which is to acknowledge what it is that I'm feeling. To be able to say to somebody, actually, I'm afraid. I'm experiencing fear right now in this relationship, or I'm experiencing fear right now in this moment. And that's part of, that may or may not be appropriate in every relationship and every moment, but there's a part of it which is to at least articulate to ourselves what's going on that's driving our reaction in that moment. What's going on that's driving our experience, and to allow it, to give it permission. So I'll talk about my own conditioned tendency, my own background and experience to give it a concrete example. So I grew up in Northern Ireland during the conflict that was there. And I had some experiences with that conflict. Without going into the details, but I was in a number of situations where my life was at risk. And in those situations, what I learned was to be invisible. I learned how to make myself very small, very invisible, very contracted, and to not really be seen. And that's a move away, conditioned tendency response. The centering process for me when I started this work was a process where I was able to start to have some operational control over the degree to which I would exit a situation, or that sense that I would start to disappear in the moment. And it gave me a way of dealing with some of the stressors and some of the things that were going on in life. But there was a moment in my work where I was seen. I was seen very profoundly inside of my fear, inside of the internalized terror that lived inside of me. And I was seen inside of that. And that was a very profound moment for me in terms of me being able to be with that experience and to center and face it with another person. And it was in some of the work that I did through in this embodied work that I was able to have that experience. And so there's something I think about, you know, up until that point in time, it was like there was a bit of me that kind of resented this bit of my history, that I couldn't be more visible, that I couldn't start showing up as I couldn't show up authentically as a bigger person. I could show up inauthentically a little bit at times, but I wasn't able to be visible and be there with people. But this was an experience where I was able to really be with that history and be okay with it, and to have it as a little bit of an ally that informed me. You know, it's interesting that that conditioned tendency response, that kind of historical response, has me very attuned to safety, has me very attuned to safety and dynamics within groups. And it's, for me, become an ally. It's become something that informs me, informs my practice, informs my work. One of the coaching teachers that I did work with a number of years ago said, we coach from our wounds. You know, there's something about that our wounds are the basis of any ability to be with and to work with others. And so for me, there's something about our ability to tolerate that, to center ourselves in a way that allows us to tolerate and be with whatever it is that's there. That internalized fear or anger or whatever was created that helped create our conditioned tendency response. And to be with that in such a way that welcomes it with love and compassion, rather than pushes it away. That starts to experience it as something that has some gifts to bring us. Something that has something to lend us, or to be with us inside of our practice. And something, you know, for me, at some level, my conditioned tendency may well have saved my life. You know, so at a very fundamental level, there's a deep gratitude that I have towards it. Because at a particular moment in time, it may well have done that. And that is the move from centering as a way to cope with stress, to centering with our conditioned tendency as a way to, as a route to self-cultivation. When we do that, one of the things that I think comes up for us, which shows up for us, is that in acknowledging the emotion that's there, acknowledging that internalized fear or that internalized emotion, what also comes up is needs, that we have needs. And so many of us, myself included, have been trained and acculturated in a way to not have needs, to be independent, to not need other people, to not need from community, from relationship, to be self-reliant. And you know, this is not like a diatribe against self-reliance, but we can take it too far, of course. And so when we allow ourselves to be in touch with our emotions in that moment, and the fear and the whatever it is that's present for us, one of the things that's also available for us is that possibility of touching into, and what is it I need? if you can imagine for a moment an argument with an intimate partner where you're triggered and you're in your conditioned tendency response. And imagine the possibility of being in a conversation of maybe even two people in their conditioned tendency response, starting to be able to talk about their emotions, their conditioned tendencies, and their needs, and what it is that they need. But often we have so much shame associated with having needs that actually it's very difficult for us to do that, to articulate that. But when we give ourselves permission to have needs and to have the emotions, then we can be fully seen by another person. When I described the experience earlier of being fully seen, it was by Richard on a program. It was an experience of, it was an experience of my emotions and my needs being seen. It was an experience of my vulnerability being seen, of that internalized fear being seen. All of that stuff was visible and was there without shame. It was held with compassion in such a way that allowed me to hold it with compassion. And in our work, for many of us are coaches or developers, in our work as coaches and developers, that's part of what we learn to bring, is to be able to bring that compassion and that love to people's conditioned tendencies, to their needs. So that's a way of looking at conditioned tendency that I think takes a little bit of a step on from what we talked about on the program. So I've been talking for a little while now, so I thought stop for a little while and say, what does that bring up for people? Or what questions does that leave you with, either about you or maybe some clients you're working with, whatever is appropriate for you.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, Gina.
Does a person tend to have the same conditioned response in all scenarios, or does a person have different ones?
Yes and yes. So we tend towards having a predominant response that will show up, all of the things being equal. However, people are complex. There are a whole group of people who, for various reasons, would have a move away response, or I'm sorry, a move against response, who have learned that may be unproductive for them in certain situations. So it's kind of like a bit of a fight response, and they've learned over time that fight response is not rewarded. And so they've perhaps adapted that, or they've cut something on top of it, another layer on top of it. So that sometimes happens. So you've got complexity around it. You've also got that trauma will have an impact on our conditioned tendency. So when you're working with somebody who has some trauma that they've experienced, especially trauma later in life, after the conditioned tendency has been fully formed, then a trauma that comes in on top of that will often reshape or completely distort the conditioned tendency response in some way. So you've got a kind of like a rule of thumb, which is that people tend towards a place that they go habitually. And then you've got the fact that people are people. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, cool. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts or reflections?
I've got another one.
Okay, why not? Go on a roll.
Are you gonna talk about practical ways of, models and tools to understand the conditioned responses, conditioned tendency responses, and how to choose different pathways, or is that what the program's about?
So essentially, yes. You haven't done the level 1 program, have you?
I haven't, sorry, I didn't realise.
No, it's okay. So one of the things that for people who've been through the level 1 program, they will have done a level of that. So they will have done a level of practice, and we use a very simple practice where we use a grab response. And we start off very gently because what we want to do is very lightly stimulate the nervous system. We don't want to overwhelm the nervous system, but we stimulate the nervous system to stimulate that conditioned response and to see how it plays out physically, emotionally, and cognitively. And then we work with a centering practice where we center ourselves in response to that conditioned tendency. And part of what we're doing is we're practicing allowing ourselves to feel, to experience, and to really get to know our conditioned tendency, and then to find a way to center ourselves and choose a different set of responses afterwards. Acknowledging that whatever's triggering us may trigger us again and again and again, and maybe trigger, center, trigger, center, trigger, center, you know, it may have an element of that to it. But so we've done a level of work on that on the level 1 program. And then the next level of work is a level which is, you know, we refer to on the level 1 program, but the next level of response is to really understand our conditioned tendency with compassion and to blend with it, rather than to, there's a way in which, you know, centering can be very comforting when we start this work as a way to almost smother at some level some of our conditioned tendency response or put on top of it. And so there's a deeper level, which is how to really turn and face into the conditioned tendency response. And we do that through, you know, feeling, experiencing it in the soma, in the living body, experiencing the emotion of it, understanding how that emotion expresses itself in us. Does that fear grab us around the chest? Does it get her clench our stomach? Do our shoulders, you know, how does it hold itself inside of our system? And then how can we actually feel into and experience and face that and really allow ourselves to live the full experience of that conditioned tendency response as it plays out in us, and include it in how we move forward rather than centering over it. And that's really the next piece that we're looking at here. Now,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
You hear me now?
Yes, Pedro.
Okay. So can I make a question?
Sure.
What is the relation, if there is a relation, between centering and healing trauma?
Ah, that's a bigger question.
Well, it's a little
So let me say a couple of provisos before I get into that. The first one I'd say is that's a huge question, and I will touch on it rather than fully answer it because it's a huge question. That could be a whole webinar in itself. The second thing that I would say is that I am not an expert in trauma. I have some experience in working with trauma, my own and that of others. And there are people who are more specialist in working with trauma than I. So that's just, my work is, majority of my work is in the organizational and leadership domain rather than within the trauma domain. So I think that's fair to say as well. So I think centering can be a really powerful tool as we start to explore and work with historic traumas, you know, and it is a really powerful tool. Often when we have trauma, there's a degree of dissociation. And when we dissociate, part of what we're doing is we're leaving the body. We're kind of, it's overwhelming, it feels too much, and we're kind of exiting at some level. And when we're in that space, part of what's not available for us is the ability to tolerate the level of sensation that we're experiencing in our bodies. It's like, you know, we've probably all had the feeling of, at times, maybe on a really hot summer's day and you're trying to sit still and it's just too hot and your skin starts to itch and it just becomes too much and you kind of have to just do something. That's almost the dissociation experience, except rather than doing something, people are just exiting. It's like the level of sensation, the level of discomfort becomes too much. And so centering is a way to give people then a safer space inside of their body where they can have some level of contact with their lived experience. It's a way in which they can find their way back into their body in some level of contact with that. Now, trauma work is often done very slowly and building up, because part of what we need to build up is build up a level of tolerance with sensation. Because often there has been, part of what's happened is that the ability to tolerate that sensation has been lost. And so part of what we're building is the capacity to build a container that can hold that safely inside of our bodies without re-traumatizing ourselves, which is really important, because there is some evidence that some ways of addressing trauma that have historically been done are actually re-traumatizing by causing somebody to relive their trauma. So it's really important that we don't do that. And so part of what centering can provide is a safe way to get back inside the body and back inside the lived experience and start to provide more range of choice. But it's slow and it's patient work. It's really important work, and being seen and being accepted and loved inside of whatever conditioned response we have can be a really important element of that. And again, that has to be measured by the practitioner about the level of that the person can receive at any moment in time. So there's a real skill in working, I think, with trauma to be able to measure yourself in relation to that person's trauma, so that you can be at a level that they can tolerate without dissociating or freezing or re-traumatizing. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but that's a webinar in and of itself, and probably
sure.
one somebody else should give.
Just wanted a little clarity with this.
Yeah.
Of course, it's deeper.
Yeah. No worries. Radek, are you?
Yeah.
Hey, lovely to see you. You
Yeah,
came on a bit later, so I didn't get to see you at the start.
Yeah. I have a question about bodywork session.
Yeah.
In leadership too. Currently, I am in process of certification in Somatic Strauss Institute in California. So we get there with Sergio as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about how you can incorporate bodywork into leadership, also into the corporate business. It's very tricky for me right now. Yeah.
So you mean the formal lying down bodywork that's part of this bodywork?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me speak to that a little bit before I answer your question, because not everybody will be aware of that.
Okay.
So part of the Strauss Institute methodology includes a lying down form of bodywork. Not everybody who's a Strauss Institute practitioner coach will incorporate that into their practice. Some people do, some people don't. And it's a very direct way where we start to work with the armoring that's been built up in the tissues. So when I talked earlier about my historic patterns of invisibility, there was a way in which there were a series of long-term contractions. If I can do it again. Where I held myself smaller. And physically smaller, that sore on the back, physically smaller, emotionally smaller. They contract because the physical shaping impacts your emotions and what you can feel, which impacts your thinking. Everything gets smaller. It impacts your possibilities for taking action in the world. So the lying down body work is a way of physically, through patterns of breath work, through pressure points, and through tissue manipulation, of actually starting to break down some of that historic holding. And it's very powerfully transformative. and it's beautiful to watch because you can see a person going through change, and you can see that when they stand up afterwards, they are physically different. They show up differently. It's like stuff has just dropped off them. So it's beautiful work. The incorporation of that into leadership coaching is a really interesting question.
Yeah.
So there's about 3 things that I need to say by way of that. First is, you need to look at, if you're going to do work that includes physical body work as part of your practice as a leadership coach, you need to look at insurance inside of your country, and the rules are different country to country, but if you're going to do that, you need to be insured to be physically touching people. Just being insured as a coach may or may not give you that cover depending on your insurance cover. So there's just, that's like a thing that you just need to pay attention to. The second thing is, like, there's a practical dimension to it, which is, so I do a lot of my coaching in corporate offices. So I turn up at my clients and I go into their offices in the city of London, for example, and I go into their offices and I work with them. There is no massage table there that I can have them lie down on. There is no, you know, it doesn't have the facilities, and I'm not lugging a massage table in and out of the London Underground. I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that. So, you know, there's a practical dimension to doing body work. And then the third piece is a relational dimension between you. No, there's actually another aspect of the practical dimension, I think, is you know, glass offices are, you know, it's never going to happen. So you need to find appropriate meeting rooms to be able to do that. Then there's the relational dimension. So body work in my practice tends to show up after I've worked with somebody for a little while, and it tends to show up as, do you want to try this? Here's what this would look like. Why don't you bring in a yoga mat and a pillow next time we work together, and we'll do a little bit of this. And then I have them lie down on the floor, and I'll take my shoes off so that I can kneel down on the floor beside them, and I do some body work. And I do it in my suit if I'm in the city of London, and it looks all very weird, and it's whatever it is, but I do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to do it when there's a solid relationship in place, and the person, I believe, will be open to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm looking for, you know, and I always leave it with somebody like, okay, so, you know, here's this thing, we've been doing this somatic work, we've been, you know, this is where you've gotten to, there's this extra component. I think here's what it may offer you. Would you be interested in that?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can do it. And I've done it in all sorts of corporate offices, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, people will choose the rooms that they have our coaching sessions in very carefully, and they'll bring in a yoga mat or equivalent, camping mat, whatever it is. And we do it like that. And, you know, you've got to have a level of trust built up with somebody. If you're working with an accountant, it won't happen for the first year, by and large, is my experience. But, you know, that said, you know, Richard always tells the story of kind of having someone lie down and doing body work on them in the Pentagon. So, you know, you'd be surprised at what's possible. I think, you know, we hold limitations inside our heads that aren't always there sometimes. So what I found is the more I'm willing to be brave around introducing it, the more of it I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that there's probably more of that been about my journey of learning to be brave around it rather than about other people.
Yeah. So do you think it's possible to reach full embodiment without body work?
I think it's much slower.
Yeah.
I think it's much slower.
Sense which I have. Yeah.
It's much slower. I think, you know, there's a lot of people will get a lot of value from the standing up work, and there are people for various reasons to whom body work will not work, at least initially within the work. Maybe traumas or historic pieces that make it difficult for them to step into. But I think it accelerates the process of development dramatically.
Yeah.
It just moves everything more quickly.
Yeah, so the armoring is much faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's this process of the conditioned tendency is like when you're lying down and you're doing body work and you're having the experience of going through that process of change. One of the things that it offers is it offers a place where you can be with your conditioned tendency response in a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
No worries. I'm aware of time, and we're kind of coming to the end of the call, so I want to start to wrap up. Although I know that I may miss out some questions. So, if there's
Can I just ask some very practical
Sure.
questions quickly?
Yeah.
Which is, is there another European program offered other than the one in May? And can you talk for 2 minutes about what the level 2 does versus what level 1 hasn't done? And perhaps you're doing that anyways just now, but just, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to do. So the next level 2 program is running in May. We don't have another level 2 program in the diary at the moment, I don't think. But you know, that's probably just a matter of time. What the level 2 program does, so there's a number of pieces that we do on that program that really continued the conversation we've been having here. So part of what we do is we ask people in advance of the program to prepare an emotional autobiography. And the emotional autobiography is a way in which we can start to see and experience the forming and shaping that has happened of our conditioned tendency response, and through which we can start to reinterpret it and start to understand the value that that has been for us. So it's one of the practices that we have is a practice of speaking our emotional autobiography in small groups. And that, I think, it just gives us that possibility of understanding and seeing the formation of our conditioned tendency and understanding the value that it's been for us. We, as well as that on the program, we do some more work. We do some body work. So we actually have a practice of experiencing and receiving and also giving body work. So we guide people through a bodywork practice with each other, where they get to see the way in which bodies move through change and get to see the way that their own body moves through change and bodywork. And that can be quite enlightening and revealing and insightful as a process, as well as releasing some of the armoring and the history that we've held on to over time. As well as that, we do some more familiar practices that we add to and that we add new levels to. So on the course, we do the spirited commitment to dignity practice with the pads. And so we take that to the next level. And we've done that with our arms. We also do that with our legs on this program. And we start to explore what happens when you release armoring on the lower half of the body, because that's a different experience. Those of you who've been through that practice know that this releases a lot of armoring on the upper body. There's also a lot of armoring on the lower body. And the release of that armoring can be very, very powerful in terms of people's ability to feel their own sense of groundedness in the world and to be able to stand in their power in this world. So there's a very powerful experience that can come from the release that's available inside of that practice. We continue working with our Jo Kata, and we add more moves to that. So that's Jo Kata is a move, or a set of movements that we appropriate from the martial arts, kata from the martial arts. And we continue to develop in that. And we continue to develop how it is that we use that as a practice to cultivate the qualities that we want to show up with in the world. We start to notice the difference between learning the second set of moves and learning the first set of moves. Often people's orientation to embodied learning starts to shift a little bit. It's like, the first time I was convinced I would never learn how to do this, and I would be, and I was kind of all inside of my own clumsiness and awkwardness. This time it's like, oh no, I'm okay with this. I'm feeling better. I kind of know my own body process a bit more. So we start to explore some of those aspects of it. We do some more work with assessments, and we really deepen the level of assessments that we're going for. So really helping people get clear around the somatic assessments. How do we see what's showing up in another person's soma and give assessments that are useful for that person's development from the soma? So we really start to deepen the level of work that we do around making sure that we're giving somatic assessments rather than just assessments at a more general level. So there's a whole series of what we do, which is a build on what's gone before. And then there's a whole series of work that we do that's new stuff. And it has a nice balance of those two things. And then I think the other piece that we very often on day one, what I say to people is like, remember where you ended on day 4 on the level 1? That's where we start on day 1 on level 2. We're not gonna start like we did at level 1 with kind of all the cautiousness and trying to get to know and trying to understand what it is we're doing and what somatics is. It's kind of, no, we've done that. We start from that point, and we're looking to build depth, we're looking to build trust, we're looking to build intimacy and relationship, and we're looking to build a way of working together as a community where we're supportive of each other's development. And so we tend to move quite rapidly from that perspective into a depth of conversation and a depth of development. Does that answer your question? No? Good.
Very well.
Okay, and we're pretty much at the end of time. So I'm open to getting more questions afterwards by email. Feel free to send through questions or anything if I haven't managed to get to any questions that you have. But otherwise, I hope it was useful.
Thank you very much, Pete. It was useful. And if you need more, you have more questions about logistics and things like that, about the courses of Barcelona, just contact us at Greenlight Go, send us an email, or call us, and we'll be happy to answer those questions. And we thank you very much for being here as part of this community practice that we have. And Pete, again, thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome. Lovely to see you all again, those of you who I know from the past. And nice to meet the new ones as well.
Lots of good stuff in the chat. So
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
Bye.
You.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.